this webinar today. It's a pleasure to see you all in this call. On behalf of the publisher iOS Press and on behalf of the editor-in-chief Bharat Desai of the journal Environmental Policy and Law, I warmly welcome you to this webinar. I have the pleasure to announce this webinar on averting the climate change catastrophe. We have a full interesting panel of speakers today, and they will all be introduced by Bharat Desai in a minute. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Olaf Palme International Center, the Global Judicial Institute of the Environment, the World Commission of Environmental Law, the International Council of Environmental Law, and the Jawaharlal Nehru University. I hope you will enjoy this discussion today. And with that said, of course, this webinar is being recorded, so you can review this on the website of Environmental Policy and Law Journal later. With that said, I'd like to hand it over to you, Bharat.
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. Yeah, so thanks iOS Press, especially, and my colleague Martin Stevenga, for providing this logistical support, putting in the this entire webinar panel and web page, and doing all the logistical work, and really I'm delighted that today we're having multiple kind of special significance of today. This is today is the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's a World Human Rights Day, and at EPL we have decided to have at least 2 webinars during a year. One, we have it on the World Environment Day on 5th of June, and second we have it on 10th of December on the Human Rights Day. And this year it happens to be coinciding with almost right at the time when the 28th meeting of the Conference of Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is now taking place in Dubai in UAE. And so it's a very, very significant event, and this is of course this is very remarkable that it's an annual feature. Now, let me first introduce my distinguished panelists. We had at least 2 more panelists listed there. One was Daniel Bodensky from Arizona State University. I got mail only today in the afternoon only that Dan has dropped out because he said he had some conflict with some other events, because everybody is in demand. The event itself is of such a kind, although this today happens to be Sunday and probably, but I think, in Dubai, things must be very hot, because the conference is almost drawing to a close, 2 more days left, and everybody is, vying with, things, to take it to a logical conclusion. So we regret that, Dan had to, drop out, But in any case, we have in the order in which list is prepared. Like we have Professor Kirk Junker, very distinguished professor of law, at the University of Cologne in Germany. He's vice rector of sustainability, and Kirk has been very active. He's a board member of the Environmental Policy and Law. He has been very actively contributing to our journal. In fact, he has contributed one of the very leading contributions, on environmental justice and other things, on that book, which has been released, just 2 months ago, regulating global climate change, where Kirk is one of the contributors, and this book has been released only 2 months back, and this emanated actually from the special issue which EPL organized on focus on climate change in November, December of last year. And we have Sarah Sek. Again, she's a distinguished scholar at Marine Environment Policy Center at Dalhousie Law School in Canada. And she, her colleague, I came in touch with Dalhousie Law School through her colleague Meinhard Dole. Again, Meinhard was one of the last contribution Meinhard provided, before, unfortunately, due to his untimely demise sometime in last September. And Meinhard also has contributed to this volume, and something which was very pithy comment, saying that can we trust somebody, after 30, as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change attained the age of 30 years last year, So that was very pointed, very pithy comment, and, very, very remarkable. But unfortunately, Meinhard passed away. And thanks to Sarah, she has been very supportive, and Sarah is also has agreed to contribute to our, perspectives of women scholar, which EPL has planned to bring out, which will be very remarkable, a unique project where we will have exclusive contributions of the women scholars, as to how women take a look at this entire challenge of global environment and sustainability. And we have Susanna Boras, again, Pantinat, she is again professor of public international law and international relations, in this URV University in Catalonia in Spain. And she has been very active, in several other contributions to. She's also board member of environmental policy and law. And Susanna has also agreed to contribute to our perspective of woman scholars issue, which will be forthcoming early next year. Now let me just briefly, at least sow the seeds or prepare the ground, before I give the floor to my distinguished panelists, And as we know, since the climate change issue has been regarded as one of what the Secretary General has called as the triple planetary crisis, where he has been, running from pillar to post, and talking about, the burning planet, literally burning planet, all indications, point towards that, and series of normative processes has been taking place within the UN system itself, ranging from 2021, 2022, where the Human Rights Council stepped in, to for the first time emphatically, declare, human right to clean, healthy and sustainable environment, wide resolution 4813 of 8th of October 2028. And then the political master, the plenary organ of the United Nations, the General Assembly stepped in, wide resolution 76300 of 28th of July 2022, where the General Assembly almost is a verbatim same resolution. And this has really put the whole issue of human right environment linkage, and which includes climate change, on a global footing, and provided a robust kind of a framework, to address the whole climate change crisis and environment in general, on a priority basis. At EPL, we did organize 2 webinars last year. One was on 20th of September 2022, part 1. And the part 2 took place on 9th of December 2022 on human right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Now, as a corollary to this background, from the side of the EPL, again, we did, as I mentioned, the special issue of 52, 5 and 6 issue last year, November, December, which carried more than a dozen articles, which had been published, and the same article, iOS Press was very gracious, to bring out as a volume called Regulating Global Climate Change, which has just been released, 2 months back. And we did organize again a webinar on 5th of June 2023 on what is called the triple planetary crisis on 5th of June 2023, where again plenty of these issues were placed under scanner. And we also published a blog, just at the time when the climate change 28th meeting started, on 4th of December. My colleague, Raina, she uploaded this blog article, which goes into the entire genesis of the climate crisis, just before the COP28 took shape. Now, most importantly, probably, I thought I'll draw your attention to what the role which the United Nations Secretary General has been playing, literally as a whistleblower, to sensitize the global audience, to bring attention, because he's the only one, who is running from pillar to post, going and asking, chastising the sovereign states, activizing the UN processes, and marking, amazing, I would say, he has amazing amount of energy levels, where he, right from Stockholm Plus 50 conference, where again he spoke about the literally burning planet, and triple planetary crisis, And then he went all the way to Everest region of Nepal in the month of October, 30th of October, where he said, this is the cry out from the Himalayas, please listen to me, that the glaciers are melting and we need to give a top priority. And it was again a much surprise that he reached to Antarctica. On 25th of November, he, with the Chilean president, he reached to the Antarctica, and from Antarctica again, wanted to show the entire gravity of the, those floating huge icebergs and other things, and he spoke about saying that, very emphatically he mentioned that what happens in Antarctica does not remain in Antarctica. The entire world will be affected. And also, very interestingly, as soon as the COP28 was underway on 2nd of December, the United Nations Secretary General sat with the UNEP Goodwill Ambassador, a Bollywood, model and actress, Dia Mirza, where again very emphatically he put under scanner some of those issues which for the consumption of the COP28 meeting itself, And so the stage has been set, as all of us are aware, that there are plenty of issues. We don't know yet the kind of the actual churning, as compared to the COP27 meeting at Sharm el-Sheikh, where a lot of things were spoken about, where phase out, phase down of coal, etc. Now the issue has been now beyond the GHG emissions. People have now zeroed in on the agents responsible for the GHG emissions, the fossil fuel, which is again a very interesting kind of a factoring, as a part of this whole thing, the entire battle, and rival interest and the conflicting interest, including of the COP president himself, for instance, these issues have really, we do not know what actually have the effect on the outcome of the COP itself. The global stocktake, which has been also suggested, and the climate finance, after 31 years or so, that what level, the climate finance will be required. Like, of course, the, loss and damage fund has been activated, which the Secretary himself says a very too little amount has been put into $475 million, which has been committed. But the most important aspect, which probably should drive the states which have assembled, at Dubai COP meeting, is that as compared to the 1990, around the time when the UN General Assembly, went to the drawing board with resolution 4353 of 8th of December 1988, when it spoke about the climate change as a common concern of humankind, as compared to 1990, in 2019, the global emissions actually rose by 54%. As compared to when we started. So then that leaves a very, 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 very ominous question. What went wrong? What happened to the entire global climate change regulatory process? 31 years are over. Are we really groping in the dark? Are we heading in the right direction? These are the very searching questions which we need to really ponder over. And I think this exactly, it set the stage for my eminent panelist, So I mean, now start the process. Maybe I'll start with you, Kirk. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bharat, and thank you for setting the stage. Thanks for the invitation today. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll connect my remarks with those that you just made and make observations of two themes from what we've seen in the Conference of the Parties. One is the importance of language, and the second is the difference between politics and law. So I'm speaking in this regard as a public lawyer, so you might guess which my perspective will be as between politics and law. Yeah. The first thing among the themes that I want to talk about is something that you've just mentioned to us all, Bharat, and that is there are more delegates than ever. And much of the world's media has reported on this. And it's not just that the total number of delegates has increased, but if you look at the number of NGOs and party participants, that has not increased. What has increased and increased the large number are the number of lobbyists and influencers who go. To the point where we're now down to relatively few cities in the world that have large enough conference centers to host all these people. So this is one observation we can make, is that why have we allowed a group that putatively is designed to solve a planetary crisis to turn into a lobbyist tourism conference? At the same time, and you've just pointed it out, Bharat, emissions have continued to increase. So the sort of flagship conservative newspaper here in Germany, the Frankfurter Allgemeine, put a very nice chart on the front page of its paper the day the conference opened, just comparing the curve on the years of the conference between emissions and number of delegates, and they almost parallel. So if we were very simple scientists about this, we would say with every additional delegate, we add more carbon. That's about all we can say from that sort of relationship. My second theme here, and you've alluded to it as well already, Bharat, is, and I'm going to read from my notes here to be efficient with our time, based upon independent journalism at the Center for Climate Reporting, which itself met with 27 different governments before the Conference of the Parties began, the BBC reported on November 27th that Sultan Ahmed Al-Jaber is using the conference as a platform to make oil deals with 15 different countries. Mm-hmm. They included proposed so-called talking points, which is what the documents showed, such as one for China, which says that ADNOC is the United Arab Emirates state oil company, that ADNOC is, quote, willing to jointly evaluate international liquefied natural gas opportunities in Mozambique. And I've just met Sarah, but I'm sorry to say that the second one is Canada, and the third country is Australia on the list. The document suggests telling a Colombian minister that ADNOC, quote, stands ready to support Colombia to develop its fossil fuels resources. In addition to that, there are talking points for 13 other countries, which include Germany. So I'm not just casting stones at Canada. I'm sitting here in Germany, and Egypt, who just held the conference last year, telling them that ADNOC wants to work with their governments to develop fossil fuel projects. Al-Jaber, as the president of the COP, denied that his country is using the meeting to make oil and gas deals. He said the report was aimed to undermine his presidency. Quote, these allegations are false, not true, incorrect, and not accurate. I would remind you, as well as being the COP president, Al-Jaber is also the CEO of the UAE's oil company, ADNOC, and of the state renewables business, Masdar. So this sets the stage as well. And Bharat, you've also, for us, set the stage with my third observation here, and that is regarding loss and damage. Loss and damage was finally explicitly put on the table in Scotland in COP26 after years of being what I call the truth that dare not speaketh its name. And at last year's, what I'll call the Egyptian Resort Conference, was kept on the table with little concrete happening. In his closing remarks last year, COP27, Executive Secretary Simon Stiell said, quote, we've determined a way forward on a decade-long conversation about a crisis. Would we have a decade-long conversation about a war or other? How can we call it a crisis and have a decade-long conversation? In any case, he said, we've determined a way forward on a decade-long conversation on funding for loss and damage. Among other positive steps, he said that in the text adopted last year, we have been given reassurances that there's no room for backsliding. It gives key political, there's the word to pay attention to, signals that indicate the phase down of fossil fuels is happening. This year, on November 30th, 2023, he again told the press, he said, today's news on loss and damage, this is now a year later, gives this UN climate conference a running start. I don't know what we've been doing for a year that we have to have a running start after this was already on the table last year. All governments and negotiators must use this momentum to deliver ambitious outcomes here in Dubai. I'm sorry, folks, but that last word, Dubai, could have been filled in by any city that has hosted the COP for the past 20 years. This is the same sort of empty political rhetoric that we start and end the conferences with. On the social media platform X, the General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, also welcomed the agreement to operationalize the Loss and Damage Fund, calling it, quote, an essential tool to deliver climate justice. Well, good that we have the word justice in there. And he urged leaders to support the fund and get the COP28 off to a strong start. He added, quote, the fund has been a long-standing demand of developing nations on the front lines of climate change, coping with the cost of devastation caused by ever-increasing extreme weather. However, what I would add, after hearing these two UN leaders make these comments, is now we have 2 years of reaction time for those who benefit from climate change from fossil fuels interest to prepare their response. They see it's not going to go off the table again. And insofar as they have done so, what they have controlled on the narrative is it only is being characterized as charitable donations. Loss and damage, and this is my perspective as a lawyer, okay, justice is in the room. We heard that word from Antonio Guterres, but justice is in the room, meaning someone should pay. Justice would really be in the room if it was mentioned why they should pay. That would be how we would see this as a lawsuit. Two automobiles are in a car accident. One blames the other. The second is only going to pay if they are responsible. They're not going to make a charitable donation. So this missing causation link is still missing. And then if we look at the amounts for these charitable donations, Al Jaber has said that the UAE will commit the equivalent of 100 million US dollars to the fund. Sounds substantial. Until you look at the gross domestic product of the UAE, it's 414 billion per year. If I reached into my pocket sitting here right now, I probably have the equivalent in my pocket compared to my paycheck of what the UAE is offering in that regard. And it's not just the UAE. Germany pledged an amount of 100 million as well, and its GDP is 4.4 trillion US dollar equivalents. This is not how one responds to a crisis. This is pocket change given to a beggar on the street as charitable donations. The United States, with a GDP of 22.5 trillion, and Japan with a GDP of 4.2 trillion, also announced contributions, but again, they called them contributions, charitable donations. Okay. I don't, Bharat, please hold me to time here. Since Dan Bodansky dropped out, maybe I get 2 extra minutes.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. We have enough time.
Okay, thanks. On language, and this is not new, the Framework Convention is a binding legal document. It featured the word mitigation in the English language. And aside from a little mitigation that we attempted to accomplish with the Kyoto Protocol, mitigation quickly sort of disappeared from the discourse about what the Conference of the Parties are attempting to do. In fact, if you look at the numbers that were accomplished through Kyoto, we had the United Kingdom successfully meeting its numbers only because it shifted from any heavy industry to being a tourist state. And we had Germany shifting by meeting its numbers only because it closed all of heavy industry in East Germany during the time. The benchmark year is very convenient for Germany in that regard because it happened to be just before all the heavy industry in East Germany was closed. And once it was closed, it looked like a lot of emissions had been accomplished and saved. Since that time, we do have the word adaptation as well in the Framework Convention. Everybody has shifted their focus to adaptation, but the focus to adaptation itself was not as to the legal terminology of the Framework Convention, which said only if and when mitigation is not possible. Instead, adaptation has been looked upon as being a free choice. No, we don't want to mitigate. We would rather adapt. That is not what the legal agreement says. Now we've even shifted to a new word that's not even in the legal agreement, resilience. As though we all just got parachuted in to a crisis situation that we didn't create, and we're just going to cherry pick, well, which species are going to save themselves anyway, and we'll feature those. That's not part of the legal agreement. So we went from mitigation to adaptation within the legal agreement, not according to the terms. And now we've moved out of the legal agreement to resilience, which isn't even in there. So here's where I'll finish. What can we do? As I said, I'll feature my perspective as a lawyer. We litigate. Here in Cologne, we sit just 35 kilometers from the Secretariat to the Framework Convention in Bonn. And I know personally 2 lawyers and 1 political strategist who have worked there. The strategist and 1 lawyer have left in frustration, and the third, a lawyer and career UN diplomat, just retired early, also due to his frustration in the process. Is the world a better place because of the UN? Yes, of course it is. But does the UN behave like a legislative body? No, it does not. And it's not designed to, but somehow this seems to be the expectation we have been putting upon it. We expect it to behave in a way that the states will come together. And I check with my own students. They really think because they like these videos you can see of the country card in front of everybody sitting there. And they actually think that the UN accomplishes its goals by having votes, like it's a parliament. And it doesn't work in that way at all. And the Conference of the Parties is a perfect example of that. So if we do look to litigation, I would illustrate with a case here from Germany. In 2019, the German Bundestag, the parliament, enacted a climate protection statute. Pay attention to the year, 2019. By February of 2020, not even a full year later, several NGOs led by Luisa Neubauer, a woman, and I'm pointing this out now because of the work that Sarah and Susanna are planning to do with you, Bharat, and already doing, and also represented by a woman, the attorney Rhoda Verheyen, brought an action against the German state. And this is like what has happened in the United States as well, starting in 2015 with Juliana versus the United States, using Our Children's Trust, all the way up to the new case of Montana versus Held, also brought by women with Our Children's Trust. This case in Germany proceeded all the way to the Federal Constitutional Court of Germany, and in April of 21, the Federal Constitutional Court ordered the legislative body to change the legislation to set clear provisions of reduction targets by the end of the year that would be effective beginning in 2031. So really putting legislation in place that begins and carries out in the future. What was the legislative response? It was immediate. They didn't even wait to the end of the year. Why didn't they? Because they were told by a court through litigation how to do their legislative task. So now what we see as lawyers is a court has to tell a legislative body, and the UN isn't even a legislative body in that regard. So to me, if we want to get something done, legislation is the way. In a period, or excuse me, litigation is the way. In a period of 18 months, we went from a deficient climate statute in Germany through a lawsuit all the way to the Federal Constitutional Court to a new piece of legislation that is effective due to litigation. So if we compare that worldwide, we have doubled the amount of litigation on climate. Now I'm going to go back to my notes, if you'll excuse me. Total number of climate cases more than doubled since the first report on the issue, from 884 cases worldwide in 2017 to 2,180 cases in 2022. 17% of these cases are now in developing countries, including small island developing states. These actions are brought before 65 different adjudicative bodies worldwide. So in conclusion, I would have to say that it's litigation, not legislation, and not politics that are going to address something that we're calling a crisis. I'll stop there so that we have time for discussion. Thanks very much for the extra minutes, Bharat.
Yeah. Thank you, Kirk. I think you underscore several those, I would say, those raw nerves, so to say, where the entire problematic, so far as the global regulatory, process on climate change is concerned, and that is exactly what all indicators which show you that after 31 years or so, somewhere, does it really give an impression that the entire regulatory approach and the process is floundering somewhere? It's not heading anywhere, that the even the basic objective of the very objective of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was stabilization of greenhouse gas emissions at a particular level. That object still remains very, very far away. It's nowhere in sight. Nowhere in sight. Emissions right from the point where when we started the process, and today in 2019 also, 54% the emissions have grown. So that speaks for itself, that the regulatory effort, which are the huge amount of paraphernalia, the institutional, the way in which the climate secretariat is proliferating in city of Bonn itself, occupying places after places, and this entire things, the entire climate bureaucracy, which has really, taken shape, and I think, that would probably raise, I think maybe we can discuss that has it become a kind of a huge climate chessboard, where the different countries, the players only find time, convenient yearly to play their respective games, without making any measurable, meaningful, concrete kind of a meeting the objectives of the convention, and the whole criteria on which the climate regime itself was rested, the criteria of differentiation, the principle of common but differential responsibility and respective capability. That is nowhere seen to be, in the picture, the entire differentiation, stratification, or the special effect, which was to be given, the leadership principle, the people who did. And this is what the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, when he went on the opening day, on the first, this is exactly what he mentioned, the equity and the justice, saying that those who cause the problem, they have to take the lead, and that has become very elusive. The lead which was expected to be taken by the principal, those players, has become really, really elusive. So maybe I'll come back to you, Kirk. Let me now, give floor to Sarah. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to join this conversation. I'm going to start by noting that I'm not at the COP. I am speaking from Halifax, Nova Scotia, where Dalhousie is located. And here we always start with what's known as a land acknowledgement by noting that I am speaking from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and we are all treaty people. And this is actually a very important starting point for a conversation about international law and international environmental law, because while there are peace and friendship treaties that underlie the land relations here, they're not in the UN treaty database. And so as we engage in reflecting on reconciliation, which is what we describe it in the Canadian context, we're kind of aware that international law as a starting point is fundamentally flawed because of its failure to recognize these treaties. And so we have to think cautiously about international law sources as we're moving forward. So I'm going to circle back to the land piece and why that actually matters, but I want to jump in on, I guess, a number of different fronts. I'm going to start by just noting, and I will also circle back to this, the loss and damage question. And Kirk, I agree and disagree with some things that you've said. I'm going to start by noting, Bharat, I'm assuming you're aware that I co-edited a book on loss and damage with my colleague Meinhard Duell. And what we did in that book was to look at loss and damage both within the climate regime and outside the climate regime, with an understanding that the structure of the climate regime, as you noted, has been focused on this overarching question of stabilization of emissions. But that means that from the starting point, the fact that greenhouse gas emissions cause harm has sort of been left out of the equation or completely sidelined. And so it's only now, of course, that we have this loss and damage fund, but the loss and damage fund is only for those most vulnerable developing countries, and therefore leaves out the vulnerability of groups within states. And so if we look at Canada as an example, and we think of the move towards a human rights-based approach to climate change, that movement started in part through an initiative involving the Inuit Circumpolar Conference, because of course the grave consequences of climate change on the Inuit and rights to culture and everything else with the melting of the ice. So it's interesting to see at the COP now that the Inuit and other Indigenous peoples are saying, hang on a second, there's this loss and damage fund. Why can't we have access to this fund? Because we are incredibly vulnerable to climate emissions, and we have really not contributed to this problem. So I'll just start with that because I think it's an interesting additional sort of challenge. The second point I want to make, Bharat had suggested we reflect on the IPCC and the scientific reports in terms of what the climate problem is. As noted, I've been thinking a little bit about the sort of gender dimensions to the climate problem. And I note that another sort of interesting line of inquiry is, what would the reports of the IPCC have said in the early days if they had actually been gender and other inclusive? Because you see the IPCC sort of acknowledging, hang on a second, in the early days, there were a very small number of scientific reports that were authored by women. And there's a growing push to include more reports that are authored by women. And then the question becomes, would they be different? Would they do different science? Would the science look different? And I want to reflect, I guess, a couple of things on this. First is it's really important to take an intersectional approach, and therefore a human rights-based approach to any thinking about women as a category, and to be critical of that and self-aware of that. And I say that as a Canadian because the premier of the province in Canada that is most climate responsible, which is Alberta, is currently led by a woman who is more of a fossil fuel lobbyist than any fossil fuel lobbyist could ever be. So there is no magic to the word woman. But if you take an intersectional approach and you think about, and you also, rather than thinking about women, think about care, those who take on greater care responsibilities, whether it's to people or to the earth, then you have different priorities and knowledges that are coming to the fore. And so I think it's interesting if you look at the IPCC reports and the reflections on this, that as they have widened the scope of authors, you see also more attention to not just emissions reduction and how to do it, and certainly not just to how to offset, so to pretend you're cutting when you're really not because you're getting somebody else to cut for you, but instead a lot of attention to what are the impacts of climate. And so if the early IPCC work, I'm making this up, right? But I wonder if the early IPCC reports had been more inclusive, would this have forced a more integrated conversation so that we don't find ourselves in the situation we are under the current climate regime, where first of all, we're pretending that there are no harms until we hit 1.5, which is ridiculous, because of course there are lots of consequences from climate change already. And secondly, we have a situation where even in the adoption of the Paris Agreement, which takes on loss and damage in a separate article, the decision adopting the agreement is one that says this has nothing to do with liability for harm, right? So those are just some sort of starting reflections on loss and damage and gender. And I'm just going to add, I guess, a few more reflections, and then on the gender aspect to sort of think about this. There's some studies that have noted that unlike other, unlike the Rio Declaration, for example, which has a provision that notes the important role of women in environmental management, and some of the other treaties from the time, like the Desertification Convention and the Biodiversity Convention, the Climate Convention, as initially conceived, makes absolutely no mention of gender, nor of human rights of others. And of course, we know we only see this in the Paris Agreement, in the preamble, and then a gradual opening up of participatory opportunities, a gradual opening up and focus on the need for greater engagement and participation of women, but also children and youth, and also very definitely much greater increased recognition, at least, of the importance of Indigenous peoples in these conversations, and local communities as another sort of version of this. But the language in which we're seeing this, I think, is also really interesting. So when it comes to gender, on the one hand, there is the important finding that, and this we see in the IPCC reports now, the important sort of confirmation that for social and other reasons, women are more greatly impacted by climate harms, and therefore there's a real need to include their knowledge in the development of solutions and to ensure that they're participating and actively engaged. And so you see, on the one hand, a recognition of what I'd call sort of victimhood, but on the other hand, you also see a lot about equity and empowerment, and this is also really important, but something that I'm a little concerned about also is this turn to what I might describe as sort of a savior narrative, that if only we could get more women in positions of power, more women doing this, more women doing this and that, then the problem would be solved. As opposed to saying, what is it about this sort of image of women that everybody needs to take on? So you're not just sort of saying, okay, you know, we also see this with youth, right? Like, let's bring the youth to the table. It's your problem. You take care of it. More women at the table. It's your problem. You take care of it. But that doesn't really address, I think, a number of things, one of which is the need for transformation. And I'll end here. The need for transformation, which is critical. So if you're bringing more people to the table, you're not actually changing the table. The table is the same. You're just bringing them to the table. I think we need to change the table. And then the question is, how do we do that? And what does that involve? I think the human rights turn creates an opportunity for true transformation. But how much of that can come within the climate regime, I think, is a real question. One can be hopeful that some of the decisions, the ICJ and also the ITLOS decisions sort of forthcoming might have an opportunity or create an opportunity for, you know, explicit consideration of state obligations, not just coming out of the Paris and UNFCCC, but also through a human rights lens and with an oceans intersection, which I think is really important too. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to our further discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, for bringing in this very, very important, you know, the gender dimension, you know, and that's exactly what I think it fortified what I was trying to look at, you know, from our larger that, you know, perspective of the women scholars, you know, that if women are part of the process, you know, and if they look at the whole thing, does it look different? Will it be different? And I think this is exactly what you really, you know, put the finger on this this issue, you know, especially so far as the climate process. And this is part of the larger, you know, kind of a, you know, challenge of, you know, factoring in gender so far as the global processes are concerned, conflicts from the peace treaties to host of the other things, the, you know, parity, which now the Secretary General is talking, you know, that the headquarters now almost at the special level, you know, staff and the officers level, the gender parity has reached. There is no doubt, there is a big gender gap. Global gender gap is huge, unbelievable, you know. So that factor is very important. But in terms of addressing the whole issue, you know, and like when we talk about the climate regime itself, like the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change has not been explicitly right from day one, has not been speaking about it. Only later on during the COP meetings, the gender issue came, the Lima Action Plan, and how this has really taken many years after the climate convention, you know, the regime was solidified. So it all depends how many elements will be added, what kind of you know, issues, perspectives, and the concerns, you know, of women will be factored. And I think this will be a very important kind of a thing, you know. So instead of, like you rightly said, you know, like bringing in more people on the table, you know, well, that is always doable, it's possible, but how do we change the table? And that holds the crux of the issue, you know. So, and I will revert back, you know, on that issue, you know, what I alluded in one of my own things, you know, that if that table, you know, which originally spoke about, you know, the bargain and the framework it provided was the common concern of humankind. So does it really, does the table look very small, very short, you know, very inward looking, you know? Can we enlarge the ambit of the table, you know, taking it to the level of what I call it the planetary concern? Maybe this just a food for thought, and I'll revert back to you once I you know reach to, you know, Susanna. So over to you, Susanna, from the ground zero at COP28 meeting in Dubai. So what is your sense? You know, how do you feel? Do you feel the hit? Yeah, over to you.
First of all, thank you very much for the kind invitation. I'm very delighted to be here sharing this webinar with so prominent professors, which I learn a lot and feel really shame a little bit, so sorry about. But let me explain that for me it was really difficult to reach to the COP28. It's my second COP. I have been in Madrid in COP25, and this is my second. It was really a kind of sacrifice for myself being here. Personal, economical, etc., carbon footprint, as Professor Duncan said, but I considered that it was really important to be in the same place at the decisions for the future, for the present and the future generations will be affected. So being here in the COP28, it's a great opportunity to make some kind of influence over our representatives, our political representatives. For instance, yesterday we were trying to help the delegation of Bolivia, which is the only one with indigenous people representation, trying to reverse the attempt to revoke the word non-market solutions, non-market solutions dealing with nature. We know that the word nature-based solutions are very important in the climate change solution, but the importance of use of language, as has been said, is really important. So Article 6.8 of Paris Agreement is really crucial, and I think it is very important to avoid that nature is being used again as a market-based approach, as has happened in Kyoto Protocol with a clean development mechanism, which the results were really against nature. So I'm here representing women's rights. I'm part of the delegation of Women Be. But also I'm here representing UN platform Harmony with Nature, which is a platform what was created some years ago, just to gather different people from different disciplines to defend the rights of nature. Litigation is crucial. It has been crucial for climate litigation, but also for natural rights litigations. We have very interesting outcomes from domestic courts defending the rights of nature and the right to a stable climate. But today, that is the day for celebrating human rights. I think we have to change our narrative. We have to speak on fundamental rights, including human rights and natural rights. So law has to be moved to another paradigm shift, putting the earth, nature at the center. It means introducing new principles, new duties in a way to achieve the possibility to live in harmony with nature. And this is really important. It has been really important in the COP talks. Many indigenous people has the place to speak on behalf of nature. I think they are the only representatives of nature. And this is really important because since the adoption of the UNFCCC in 1992, human rights and the rights of nature has not been really taken into account. And it's time to reverse this situation. Time is passing, the science is producing more evidences that we need to connect or reconnect with nature. This is something related to the global north countries mainly. We are disconnected completely from this reality. We need to reverse, to reconduct the legislation towards the ecocentric approach. Earth-centered approach makes nature at the core of this legislation. This is something that IPCC has been referred in the last report, when has been said that in the last decade, about 54% of the anthropogenic emissions responsible for global warming were absorbed by the natural elements. So nature will protect us. Of course, we have law, we have litigation as a tool we have the science for seeking a solution to climate change, but these tools are not going to be enough if we don't change the perspective in which we are related with nature. So I think the voices from indigenous people, but not only indigenous people, but also women and also migrant persons, youth, are really important to be incorporated in the COP talks. I'm really aware that civil society sometimes are not really convinced with these annual climate meetings. They are not really trust on the achievements of these COPs. But I think because people are more aware about or more concerned about what is happening around them, what is happening on the ground. And cities, for instance, are making a great effort to adapt to climate change. And sometimes without so many resources to adapt, especially in the global south cities or communities, while the solutions, the climate solutions from the global north are still thinking on amplifying the sacrifice zones. When we are thinking on renewable energies, when we are thinking about electric cars or some kind of this green technology or so-called green technology, at what cost? This is the question. We are experiencing new extractivism as a new way to colonize the same places that has been colonized before. So something has to be done to introduce more fundamental rights approach, more fundamental justice approach, global justice approach, before to adopt these decisions. Perhaps it could sound as an utopia, but I think we have to reflect more about what decisions will be more convenient to the planet, to the human beings, but not only human beings, all natural beings. So this is the questions. We have to be aware that we are part of nature, and nature is us. This is the question. And with our nature, we don't have our rights. And today is the crucial day to rethink this question, how to reconcile human rights with rights of nature. And this is very much been talking these days in the COP28. We have been dealing with ocean rights, as the ocean rights are the true blue lungs of our planet, and they support life in all senses. So I think it's very important to be in mind, to bear in mind that we have to rethink the international law, domestic laws in these lines, in these perspectives. We are in another times comparing to 1992. We have to find new synergies of those treaties who has been developed separately as CBD and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So synergies, but considering that we are not able to use any more nature as for our convenience. We have to protect nature for guarantee an habitable place to be. So I will leave here. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Susan. Again, giving a different perspective, much wider, kind of a canvas on which, probably, it calls for. In a sense, what you mentioned is that the maybe a technocentric approach or a very mechanical or managerial approach to addressing the climate change issue probably, has led to this kind of a almost, the regime, floundering, somewhere, it's not able to make a dent, and there are vital, interest on the part of there are different lobbies and the vital interests, which the UN Secretary himself has been pointing out, that why there is no progress, because there are hard-headed national interests. And this was the issue which was flagged right at the outset when the COP28 president himself, being a head of a UAE, that giant, oil giant, which actually you're trying to enhance your oil deals rather than talking about. So can you wear two hats? Can you have that split personality? Can you do justice to that? So these are the kind of the contradiction, or kind of a inbuilt things. Probably that has created a big problematic. So I think that raises the question. Means all three panelists have been pointing out something terribly amiss, something in terms of that is not working somewhere. All those targets, forgetting about the science and other things, after 31 years or so. So in that case, the question, it raises the, like Sarah mentioned about the missing, the gender approach, the whole thing which has come too late, quite late at the stage, and Susanna mentions about, the entire broader ambit, because you are part of that mosaic, larger mosaic, you're just a cog in the machine, you are not. So question is, and I think somebody did came out with that, some of those essential ecological processes, some of those vital points, where we have already breached those limits. These are also the report which several, people have come out with. And question is, well, there are limits, like there are limits to legalese, there are limits to a regulatory process. A mere instrumentality that itself has been floundering because of the national interests of the parties which are at work. The question is, where does it lead to? 31 years are over. Are we, that it has set in some kind of a disappointment, everywhere. Although you are chasing the mirage, like 1.25 degrees Celsius, that GHG, reduction target, etc., that is proving elusive. Almost all like the Sustainable Development Goals on 18th and 19th of September in New York, when the SDGs summit met. Again, the same secretary was, blowing the whistle, saying that almost just 12% at the midway point, just 12% of the SDGs have been met. There is no sign by 2030. The similar predicament, you are been really living, in so far the climate change is concerned. There is hardly any kind of a possibility where you will meet this elusive goal of 1.5. And the question is, can we do some fundamental rejig of this entire approach to global regulation of the climate change? And if that is the case, what can it be? What can it cover? For instance, like I mentioned, I've flagged in some of my own editorial of the environmental policy and law, saying that, from common concern to planetary concern. Can the question which I'll suggest to all the panelists, can we expect now, because the General Assembly of United Nations has been, as I call it, the conductor of a what is called the giant orchestra. It had set the ball rolling by resolution 4353 on 8th of December 1988, with the climate change as the common concern of humankind, and that triggered the process for the regulatory regime itself, with just before the Rio summit, etc. So does it really require this, the political master going back to the drawing board, and the political process to be triggered within the forum of the General Assembly, where you need to rejig the entire process? Because the three regimes are there. You already had the 1992 Framework Convention on Climate Change, you have a 1997 Kyoto Protocol, you have the 2015 Paris Agreement. These three instruments are there. Kyoto is, like they say, the Kyoto is dead, long live the Kyoto Protocol, So that Kyoto has been almost put on given a decent burial. And the Paris is again, where the core principle of equity has been almost being sidelined, saying that only equals can be treated equally. And knowing very well the countries are not equal. They have, in terms of contribution, the harm caused, etc., etc. In that case, where does it head? The whole process, do we really need to have rejig the entire regulatory regime? And what will it require? Will this planetary approach, planetary, kind of a concern, can we? And what kind of elements it can have, like the factoring in crucially the gender aspect, and also the question which Kirk mentioned in terms of the causation, the cause and the effect. And that was exactly the issue of the differentiation, saying that whoever did it first, they must first do it, the leadership principle, etc., etc. So how does one revitalize the climate regime, and finally, most importantly, that knowing very well on 29th of March 2023, the General Assembly, probably that also arose out of this, sheer frustration which has set in, the fatigue effect which has set in, the kind of the, after 31 years, request made a request, unprecedented request to the to the International Court of Justice, seeking an advisory opinion on obligations of the states, in the respect of climate change. So that will take time, that again the states shall have to come forth, and knowing very well the limits of the advisory, because they are advisory only, whether the court will agree to give the opinion, if at all the advice is given, whether the assembly will need to follow that, and so that still real, will be in the realm of lot of uncertainty that per se may not make, but obviously a lot of people are saying the International Court of Justice can really spell out. So in this scenario, how does it look? I'll request all the three panelists to little reflect upon it. How do we see the light at the end of this tunnel? Where do we head? Over to you, Kirk.
Okay, I'll if either Sarah or Susanna would like to go first, I'd be happy to hear from anyone else on this as well.
Okay.
No?
Yeah.
Okay, so it is back to me. The first thing here I'm looking at, because of the point that was just brought up by Susanna about human rights, and by Sarah as well. I think this is a big, important step that begins politically. So in July of 22, we had the United Nations announcing that there is a human right to a clean environment. But again, I'll speak as a lawyer. How do we make this actionable? Because we can announce it as a nice platitude that makes everybody feel good. We recognize it as a right, but we see how difficult it has been with the European Court of Human Rights, the International Court of Human Rights. How does one actually get real traction out of something identified as a human right? And we haven't done that yet. But I think that is a step in a direction in which we can go. By whom would it be actionable? So Sarah had mentioned about the Inuit led the way in many ways about bringing some of these actions forward. But then on legal, what my former professor used to call legally piggly, little legal technicalities like standing. The Canadians and the U.S. Americans love to block things on standing. The Inuit couldn't get further with that, but there was a right identified. And against whom? And this brings me to another thought that I will end with and then share the microphone. I have suggested, and a colleague of mine here in Cologne, it's another benefit of being here, is that we're surrounded by organizations who legally represent states every June, when the real work of the UNFCCC happens in Bonn. Not our dress-up party in November and December, but when they have the yearly meetings in Bonn for the substa, and you have to work out what's happening. And he is the one who has told me about this on how this sort of work gets done. What I would bring out then is that, but he told me this won't work. In the U.S. American mentality, and I know this from having prosecuted public law environmental cases in the United States, culpable defendants do not want to pay money and say there's a cause and effect and I'm at fault. But they like to suggest that they will do projects to benefit the problem in exchange for recognition of the idea that there is a problem. And they even invent these ridiculous terms like calling it inluity. So we have this terrible idea of putting together this bad French with English and calling it an inluity. In lieu of payment for damages, we will do this project. So I have proposed to my colleague here, how about now that climate immigration by the people most harmed by these problems could be regarded by this same legal mentality that U.S. Americans have as the inluity. So you have to accept the climate migrants. So the countries that are at the original cause of these problems, we can point to Europe, although today Australia and the United States look like the big, and China and India look like the big bad guys if we look at overall current emissions. Historically, since industrialism began, Europe has still loaded the world with much more carbon than any other newcomers have done so. So we have all these migrants coming from Africa now because of desertification and drought and burning and all these other problems. How about we establish the idea through the human right political idea and through the U.S. American legal idea of the inluity, that the European states, without having to recognize that they caused the problem, accept the migrants because there's the indirect causation that they had to leave Africa because of European causation. That would be a legal solution that ought to fit in with not being saddled with saying, I caused this. Because everybody's afraid that once that Pandora's box is open, all the Western states go bankrupt just paying out the money for all the problem they've caused. So that's my 2 cents on the issue. I'll relinquish the microphone. Thank you, Bharat.
Okay. Yeah, Sarah?
Thanks. I'm trying to figure out which of the many sort of strands of thoughts to follow through here. So I'll just randomly pick a few. One is just to go back to Kirk's comment about the fact that sort of the increased number of people going to these COPs seems to parallel the increased emissions. I think a huge elephant in the room is a refusal to talk about the essential need to limit the consumption patterns of the affluent. That seems to not even be on the table, and it's very much a part of and absolutely undermines the credibility of the COP process and others. If you've got lots of people flying in private jets, the whole thing is a joke, and there's no other way to look at it. Why is it not possible to simply say, we're in a crisis, the affluent can no longer use certain luxuries toys, end game, until we figure this out? That we can't even seem to have that conversation as a serious thing, I think speaks to the magnitude of the disconnect between what's actually going on and the way in which COPs and others are operating. And I'll say, I do actually, we do at Mel have observer status, and some other people at Dalhousie in the oceans area are physically at the COP. I've been experimenting with what they've tried this year for virtual observer participant status, which I note hasn't worked out very well for me because I've had a caregiving crisis. One of my children has needed surgery, and I've been completely preoccupied for the first week with dealing with that. Now, they have recorded some sessions so that you can watch some of them after the fact, but not very many. And of course, it's not the same thing as being on the ground. Nevertheless, I think there's a real need to have a serious conversation about, is this actual way of doing things necessary? What are the carbon emissions that are associated with COPs? What are the carbon emissions that are associated with academic travel generally? Why are we celebrated when we get more money, but nobody's counting the carbon emissions that are associated and other ecological impacts that are associated with academic activities? And of course, you can extend that to everything else. But the point is, if we can't even have those conversations, there's this massive disconnect between it's urgent, it's a crisis, and, you know, a lack of addressing consumption, overconsumption, not of the poor, of the affluent. Got to be there. It's totally missing. One other thing I'll note is how to think about the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. I've made this note about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There's a tendency in international law to take a state-centric approach to the interpretation of international legal norms. But the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People surely should be understood equally, at least, through the lens of Indigenous peoples' view. If they've worked for 50 years to bring this declaration forward, then surely it is more normatively significant than simply what states think about it. And I think you could take a similar approach to the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. It shouldn't just be, I mean, first of all, states did vote in favor of it, but how do we give it traction? Whose view of it and the urgency, how can that inform sort of the interpretation of its normative status? I think that's sort of an open question. And then I'll just make one final note about the courts. I think the German example is great, but I think it's also extremely difficult to replicate in some other places. Canada is a federal state. It's a complete disaster when it comes to trying to pass any federal legislation that addresses environmental issues because it's routinely challenged by provinces and companies that go to court to cut it back. Our Impact Assessment Act has yeah, anyway, I can't sort of go down that path. We do have potentially some children's rights climate claims going through the courts, and maybe at some point we'll actually get some kind of order. But with that said, I'm hopeful, possibly naively so, that we might get something useful from the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea, or maybe the ICJ, and maybe that will help on multiple levels. Thanks. I'll stop there.
Yeah, Sarah. Thank you. I think we are bringing in a lot of those issues. Probably gradually, this is exactly what probably will hints toward what I raised. One of the 6 issues which I had flagged in my that setting the stage for the webinar itself. That let me read out that that what solutions can the scholars provide for averting the climate change crisis. I think this is exactly where probably if we think that the climate convention or the global regulatory, if something is not already working, something where it is already standard, something which is going on and on, as if you are there is a saying here in local in Hindi and in my native language Gujarati, they say you are running, but you are running in the same place. You are running in the same place, or it's literally like, where you say you are trying to do trying to find or address the issue, where you say you are trying to close the windows and you are keeping the doors open. So how does that help you, in terms of, like what Kirk mentioned, what Sarah, you are mentioning, that in terms of your consumption pattern, lifestyles, wasteful, those things, they remain the same, The question is the limits of what is called this legalese or the instrument per se, is not going to, unless you change a fundamental way in which you change your lifestyles. For instance, the way in which you live, the way in which you like carbon footprint, you are doing too much. All those people, jet set people, doing all those glitzy things, those parlor, those things, that it is a wasteful kind of a thing, somebody somewhere you need to draw the line. The question is, what will it take, going beyond, these are exactly the issue, as we saw, one of the offshoot of this entire fatigue effect and the disappointment which has set in after 31 years is making reference, seeking someone's wise advice. Here is a wise person, is a principal legal organ of United Nations, where the principal plenary organ of United Nations seeks an advisory opinion from the principal legal organ of the United Nations, that whether those 15 wise men and women, whether they will rise to agree and they will rise to the occasion to give the advice, what that advice will take, like exactly that will also, they have to find the answer. They're actually looking for answer, and I'm sure the role is cut out for some wise scholars, both men and women, to suggest, because that the states we have seen, the lobbyists, most of those corporations and even the civil society groups, they talk too much, those thousands who assemble on these sites, they're not leading anywhere. That show goes on and on and on. We don't know yet. 2 more days are left. Probably again the issue, they will struggle to have a prima facie face-saving a Dubai declaration or UAE declaration. That's it. That will be regarded as the biggest achievement for the host country till the show moves on to the next COP meeting itself. The question is, does it make a dent? Does it really make a difference to the problematic which we are really trying to address? And the most important, if the fossil fuel is the culprit, who will build the proverbial cat when that time, because it has to go out, and there are all indications that every country is trying to put in more investments in the fossil fuel. So the question is, there is going to be a long road, so far as the phase out. If that is they say 80% of the GHG emissions come from fossil fuels. If that is the case, in that case, how do you build the cat? Who will do it, and when will you do that? That really raises the crucial question. And finally, to Susanna, in terms of what you mentioned about this, the entire harmony with nature, again, that is taking the whole, widening the ambit and the horizon about your entire problematic, that this is one cog in the machine, one facet of it, because the climate change also appears as a part of the larger 17 sustainable development goals. It is one of the, something is fundamentally wrong somewhere in terms of the planetary level crisis, which one is now talking about. And in fact, we have that again will take me to the other issue, which probably, and any of the panelists can really give a little thought to it. The United Nations, the General Assembly has again set the stage for having a summit of the future next year, September 22 to 23 in New York in 2024. And at EPL, again, we have done a very audacious process. We have set in motion a process where invited contributions, on what is called the planetary future, summit of the future and beyond. So shall we wait till that time? Will that provide some kind of a wonderful pathway? Because again, we are hoping against hope, almost groping in the dark, that what kind of a fundamental pathway will come out, which will really take us into something having a very healthy planetary future, not only for the humankind, but also for other creatures on planet. So, Susanna, yeah.
Yeah, I think the Summit of the Future will be a nice opportunity to discuss all these necessary changes to put into practice, and to forge a new global consensus on what future should look like and what we can do it for contributing to our present and to the future for generations to come. I think it's quite difficult because, as we mentioned, the States has the powerful instruments or the powerful interest, and there are so many geostrategic interest, including the economic interests of many corporations linked to the fossil fuels industries. Of course, as Sarah mentioned, it's a question to eradicate, to phase out the use of fossil fuels. And the last report of IPCC reminds us that there are so many low-cost solutions already existing in our hands, but we have to rethink on the causes of the global emergency, which is the economic system. It is consumption, it is extraction, it's production. I always tell to my students when I'm dealing with climate change that climate change begins with destruction and the violation of human rights and the rights of nature. This is the beginning of all. So what is the solution to that problem, to such a complex problem? I think the solution is not only in the hands of the United Nations Assembly. Of course, we need to revisit all the procedures existing at the UN. We saw right now with the invasion of Russia, the occupation and the genocide of Palestine people. So there are so many problems that United Nations face right now, and there is a fracture, a deep fracture right now. So, but I think the Summit of the Future is the time to revisit these questions. But at the same time, in this summit, it will be considered the establishment of the creation of the UN Earth Assembly. The UN Earth Assembly was proposed in December 22 in the 30th resolution on harmony with nature. In fact, we have 11 resolutions related to harmony with nature from the UN Assembly. And the last one adopted in, the 2 years ago resolution adopted in 2022 proposed the creation of this new assembly in a way to not to solve all the problems of the humanity, but at least to provide a new alternative space to reflect that nature should be treated in another way. But of course, we need solutions at multi-level scale, starting from local communities up to international level. I think that there are there are so many alternatives to the economic system that we have right now. For instance, in Spain, which is the reality which I know the best, we have so many energy communities managing the energy supply to locals, and there are so many economy based on regenerative solutions. We have so many alternatives that we have in our hands. In fact, we don't need so many technology to solve all the problems. So we have in our hands the possibility to reconnect with nature. Of course, as a lawyer, I have different types or different tips, to include this approach. For instance, we have the principle in dubio pro natura. In case of DOP, we will protect nature. So first will be nature, after us. We have also the possibility to implement the principle of non-regression, recognize, of course, the rights of nature. This year, it was passed a new law in Spain protecting the rights of Mar Menor. Mar Menor is the largest salad lagoon in Europe. So it was the result of a popular legal initiative. So people had moved and campaigned for this law, and they get success in approving this law. And now we have a scientific committee which reject the project of development in this zone. I'm really aware that in many places around the world, the rights of nature is becoming a new reality. It's not for replacing the environmental law already existing. It is a complement to reinforce, to boost the protection of nature as a solution to the problems that we created as humanity.
Yeah, I think, yeah, thank you very much. I think it's a really larger that mosaic. I think probably that probably will need to widen the canvas, I think try to see that something from this narrow confine. I think that will again require a very fundamental rejig of this current kind of a managerial, technology-driven regulatory approach to address a problematic, I think, and probably, I think maybe we hope that by next year, when the Summit of the Future takes place, probably that will provide an opportunity. But I think both, I would say, the role, there is a task cut out for the scholars, and scholarship to at least to put forward this thing, because this cannot be left to the bureaucracy. This cannot be left to those technocrats. I think that is exactly the task cut out, and maybe we have still 1 year to go, and we have made this effort. I hope and pray that about some 25 contributions have been confirmed, and including the former president of the UN General Assembly 73rd session, from Ecuador, she has confirmed contribution, and there are several other people. So, and we still welcome, I would say, maybe I think all those other colleagues and scholars who are eager to contribute. I think we will welcome those contributions. So I think we'll just stop there, and I think we can maybe throw the floor open. There are questions. I think we already have one question. Maybe shall we take it, Martin? Okay, there is a question, I think, already in the chat box. This is from Jay from Delhi. He writes, I enjoy listening to all of you. My question is to Professor Zuzana. Innovative technology to mitigate climate change includes any advancement in the carbon capturing process, sustainability in agriculture, as well as very resilient infrastructure. Why are not countries working towards it seriously? This is to you, Zuzana.
Well, thank you for the question. It's not easy to answer, but I will try to do. Let me say that the science reports coming from IPCC mainly said that this kind of technology, capturing CO2, using nature, using compensation measures should be the last resort to cope with climate change. So first should be mitigation, reduction, degrowth. This is the solution. We cannot use, once again, nature to to eliminate our responsibility. This is only compensation measure. It doesn't replace the harm that we provoke to nature. So we cannot eliminate the CO2. So we can just keep it under the ground or under the sea. So this is not the best solution at all, according to the scientific report. So I think this would be the last resort. It is, and it's also dangerous in terms of human rights. So this type of geoengineering is projecting mainly in the global South countries, once again, paying the bill of our responsibilities. So I think we have to spread this message. We need to reduce. There is not other solution apart of it. It is the reality. We have to move another type of economy. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. I think these are some of the things exactly, but I think that is again the task cut out for the scholars to junk some of these wired ideas and proposals with some of the vested interests have been floating around, that like dumping carbon, at the seabed or under the ground or somewhere, where you cannot do this kind of a approach, which might, you never know, which might prove to be much more harmful than what we can imagine. Is that I will just turn to the participants, the audience. Is there any other question or query from the audience? Can you please write it in the chat box, or if you wish to take the floor, if somebody wants to ask anything. We still have some time left. So maybe we can wait if somebody wants to ask it. But in the meantime, finally, I'll come to the last question, which is again the pending question before what do we expect, from this, the reference made to the International Court of Justice, the advisory opinion, will it be a game changer? Will it make a difference? Will it sensitize, and chastise the sovereign states? Any of the panelists, if they want to reflect upon this part, what do we expect the International Court of Justice to do? Yeah.
Did someone?
Yeah,
I'll step in. Actually, if I could go back for 1 second to the summit, in anticipating what's coming there. This is just a comment as I've looked. First, I have not paid a lot of attention to it, and I'm realizing that I should have. So I'm grateful for putting this sort of on our list of things. But in the quick glance that I did take, I think there's some very positive moments in terms of the youth and future generations focus, for example. But there are also some concerning pieces. So the sustainable development focus and financing is still very much based on the economic growth model. And so I think some real challenging is going to be needed there to, again, economic growth for least developed countries, for the poorest developing countries, is a very different conversation from the continued growth of affluent countries and industries. And I think that conversation needs to happen. But the other piece, just linking to the question that was asked previously, is there's a whole section there on science, technology, innovation, and digital cooperation. And I admit that I'm quite concerned that there's a lot of data-driven governance seems to be a big thing these days, and I'm very skeptical about some of it because, of course, it's only as good as the data that's gathered, and often there's a lot of real challenges with that. So I'm curious. I'm just curious if anybody has paid greater attention to that and has any. Is this going to offer a real opportunity, or are there some real concerns? The last chapter seems to be transforming global governance. And I'm not quite sure on what's happening there, but that's the fifth of it's the last of 5 chapters, and some of the others have potential and others seem perhaps less so. And I'm sorry, that wasn't speaking to the court decisions, which I think are one hopes, but it's going to be unclear. I think what's exciting is the requirement at the ICJ to specifically speak to the human rights dimension. So there is potential, but again, if very, what I would call old school traditionalist interpretations that are too Eurocentric, to be honest, are adopted, then it's not going to be actually a wholesome understanding of human rights. So it could go sideways, or it could be positive. I think at both ICJ and again ITLOS, the link to law of the sea, I think, is going to be very important and very interesting, because it is important not to treat the climate regime, the UNFCCC, Paris, Kyoto, as something that exists by itself in its own little world that is not connected to other international law treaties. And the real conversation about the climate-oceans nexus is something that has to happen. And one can be hopeful that ITLOS will actually step up and say, hang on a second, we have this other, treaty, which is about law of the sea and protection of the marine environment, and it's not ousted just because there's this climate regime. There are other questions that can and must be answered through an oceans lens, and this is, states have responsibilities here as well. So that's, I'll stop there. Thanks.
I think, yeah, that ocean climate nexus, and that will be also another kind of arena which will open up, and probably we will need to wait till the International Law Commission, works out this, draft principles on sea level rise, etc. I think we'll see what lies in store. We have two more questions. I will just take one. Is about Vikrant has asked question about the current climate protection regime, considering the fact that there will be always vested interest and powerful lobbies reluctant to compromise their interest. Moreover, is it possible to build an eco-economy? Both are not considered. I think that is exactly what the panelists have been pointing out. Zuzana has pointed out about the rights of nature and her living in harmony with nature. This is something about our fundamental kind of a existential question, that how do we live, probably like what Gandhi used to say, that there are always enough, that there is, difference between need and greed, I think that again we shall have to, at an individual level, whether the regimes work or they don't work, but that choice, no one can stop us from doing, if you minimize your needs, putting your least amount of burden, on the, because there is never limitless thing, like what the Club of Rome said, that there are always limits, you cannot have a free for all, you cannot have adequate anything for everybody. And with the growing population, today we have 8 billion population. By year 2050, we shall have 10 billion. How can Earth cope up? And for sustaining that 10 billion population, we shall need the resources of 3 planets. 3 planets. From where are you going to find? So it's going to be a problematic. So we shall have to work on different other things also. And obviously the vested interest will be one of the biggest stumbling block, And there is a question from Niti, is there a need of developing country to let go the principle of common but differential responsibility, assuming that it may help to bring developed countries on the board? Maybe we will be able to implement strategies to avoid this disaster. Partially, the developed countries have already did it by basic accord. Maybe Kirk, maybe you can take a call on this part.
Okay, thank you, Bharat. Yeah, briefly, I actually I think that people who study this come into very clear 2 different camps on common but differentiated responsibilities. I'm on the camp that likes it, not because it's effective in practice, but because it makes a statement that there are different responsibilities because there were different liabilities. So I think the answer to the question, which is a very good question, is yes. I think it can contribute in that regard.
Okay. So I think with that, maybe we are drawing to the close. I think the time is almost, we have reached the limit of that, And so maybe in that case, I will conclude. Yeah, there is one more last question. Let me just take it finally, by Vanilza she's from Brazil, the right to nature has advanced, but how can it be effectively guaranteed? What are your suggestions for advancing the accountability of transnational companies that operate in global value chains? Maybe Susanna? This is the last question. Yeah.
This is not an easy question, but I think perhaps the ICJ advisory opinion will be very useful in a way to declare the duty to care and duty of diligence. due diligence is I think it's a key question to be introduced into national laws. EU is starting to introduce this new concept in a new regulation, so we will see how it works. But of course, we need to put under control the enterprise, which are not only be the major emitters, but also the great violators of human rights. So this is really important, and it's the starting point, as I mentioned before. And regarding to the advisory opinion of IGA, I may say that the Inter-American Court of Human Rights is working also an advisory opinion, and this will be very interesting to see the contrast between both. So in terms of rights, vulnerabilities, impacts, and the extension of the intergenerational perspective of human rights, as Sarah mentioned before, but also the accountabilities of states and corporations. It's very important that in international environmental law, we have a very important rule that has been born in a customary law, but it has been introduced in several treaties, which is the duty of states to control that the activities that happen in their territory and its territory do not cause harm extraterritorially beyond their national borders. And this is, I think, is the foundation of the DG of care and due diligence. States must assume the responsibility to put limits on the corporations. And here, it's not really easy because, as you know, we have corporations and other branches of these corporations operating in several parts of the world, and sometimes it's very difficult to isolate responsibilities. But I think we are on the track to identify the carbon measures. We have several reports using in climate litigation that states that there is an important corporate responsibility, but also the responsibility of the state behind these activities, these corporate activities.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I think with that, I think we'll need to bring this webinar to a close. And let me just sum up, and I think, yeah, it's excellent, I think churning where all the eminent panelists have provided us, good food for thought in terms of, somewhere trying to take a relook at this entire regulatory process, ranging from, I think strengthening the whole issue of causation. I think Kirk has been talking about the climate migration, and these are going to be the future issues which are going to be, we shall have to grapple with them, because the climate induced migration, climate, the exacerbated violence, sexual and gender based violence. These are also some of the issues which are really growing, there is a literature which is already available, and we shall have to factor in, like what Sarah mentioned as a, gender factor, so far as the entire climate regulatory process itself is concerned, So, and I think the whole, we shall have to, and it will depend, I think probably, some good churning with contributions of the written statement by the, UN member states, because that has to provide a guidance to the International Court of Justice, the sovereign state. And I think whosoever in that position shall have to provide, strengthen the whole issue about the differentiation, and asking the states, to account for it, and trying to, both in terms of the identifying the obligations of the sovereign states so far as the climate change itself. These are the two specific questions asked by the General Assembly to the International Court. And secondly is, in terms of the responsibility of the states, if they fail, especially in terms of, like the vulnerable groups, the indigenous groups, the small island states, and those who really will suffer, take the brunt of this climate related, damage, And the gender dimension, which we hope that it will assume a more concrete format, and that probably will push the regime, to at some kind of a positive, I would say, level, in terms of bringing, I would say, maybe some kind of a sanity I would say, so to say, to sanity in this entire managerial, technological, what Susanna called it, the geoengineering, these wired ideas, somewhere you need to, bring them to the ground level. I think that will help, and I think ultimately, we have to do some churning, give a thought to living in harmony with nature. This is a wider mosaic, larger canvas on which we shall have to really, trade, for our future pathway. And probably, when you, try to give respect and value to living in harmony with nature, we shall have to think about it, change our lens from that simply that hitherto something which has not yet worked effectively from common concern to probably at a planetary level. And if we have that planetary level kind of a lens and the gaze, what will it entail? What will it require us to make those fundamental changes so far as the way in which we live, the way in which we attend to host of those things? I think some kind of a major rejig shall do. So maybe we can wait, for the summit of the future in 2022-24, in September 2024 to take a call on that. Until that time, maybe I would say the task is cut out for the scholars, to provide, wherever I would say, if there is a darkness, as the saying goes, darkness, we need to light the candle or the lamp, as we call it, in Indian tradition, lighting the lamp. The darkness is not going to go away by playing any kind of a music. You have to light the lamp or the candle. I think that is exactly what the role is cut out for the scholar, to light the lamp. And I think I will just stop here. I thank each one of my panelists, Karmchankar, Sarah Sek, and Susanna Boris Pentinat, for sparing the valuable time, at odd hour. Maybe for Sarah, this must be very early in the morning, different time zones from 3 continents. The 3 panelists have joined. They have enriched our debate. And thank you very much. We look forward to your further contribution. And over to you, Martin, to finally for vote of thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Bharat, and also on behalf of me and the publisher, Kirk, Sarah, and Susanna, thank you very much for your time and your expert views. It was very, very stimulating. And I know that because we are doing this as a recording, it will be publicly available on the journal's website. We'll also promote it in the journal's newsletter, so it will go global. And I'm sure that many will view this and find it very interesting and very stimulating. And I would just like to say once again, thank you so much. Have a great day. And we look forward to seeing you join, and also participants and the attendees at the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.